My name is Rachel, and I'm 28 years old. Growing up, my parents treated me like an afterthought, while my grandparents showed me what real love felt like. In their farmhouse, I found the warmth my own home lacked. I thought having my grandparents' love would be enough to heal the wounds of my parents' indifference. I never imagined their neglect would eventually transform into something far more devastating. Before I share how my parents' indifference turned into something much worse, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit subscribe if you've ever felt invisible to the people who should have seen you most. I was born in a small town in Minnesota where tall pines lined quiet streets and everyone knew each other by name. My parents, Thomas and Laura Collins, were the definition of career-focused. Dad worked as a financial advisor, spending long hours at his office downtown, while Mom was one of the only surgeons at our local hospital. They lived in a world of numbers, investments, and medical procedures that left little room for a child. Just 3 miles down a country road from our modern, minimalist house stood my grandparents' farmhouse. Grandpa Jack and Grandma Eleanor had lived there for 40 years. The white paint refreshed regularly, the wraparound porch always adorned with seasonal flowers. That farmhouse became my real home from almost the moment I could remember. "Rachel, sweetheart, come help me with these cookies," Grandma Eleanor would call out whenever I arrived. Her kitchen always smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, the antique wooden table dusted with flour. Meanwhile, our kitchen at home remained spotless, unused, except for morning coffee and occasional takeout dinners, when my parents remembered to include me. While my parents forgot school events and missed parent-teacher conferences, Grandpa Jack would drive his old blue pickup truck to every school play and science fair. "That's my Rachel up there," he'd whisper loudly to whoever sat next to him, pointing proudly as I recited my lines or demonstrated my project. When I was 7, I won first place in the school spelling bee. I searched the audience for my parents' faces, but instead found only Grandma Eleanor, who had brought homemade lemonade for everyone and knew all my classmates by name. That night, when my parents came home after 9, Mom patted my head absently when I showed her the ribbon. "That's nice, dear. Did you finish your homework?" she asked, already scrolling through emails on her phone. I learned to pack my own lunches by age 8. I'd wake up to notes on the counter, working early, dinner in fridge. Sometimes there wasn't dinner in the fridge, just $20 for pizza. On those evenings, I'd often call Grandma Eleanor, who would insist I come over. "Growing children need proper food, not just pizza," she'd say, already setting an extra plate at their wooden dining table. The stark contrast between my two lives became my normal. At home, silence, independence, and the distant sounds of my parents' brief appearances. At the farmhouse, laughter stories and the security of being genuinely seen. Grandpa Jack taught me to fish in the small pond behind their property, his patience endless as I fumbled with the fishing line. "The secret is in the waiting, Rachel," he'd say, his weathered hands guiding mine. "Most good things in life take patience." I developed coping mechanisms early. I became fiercely self-sufficient, priding myself on needing nothing from my parents. I excelled in school, hoping that perfect report cards might finally make them notice me. Deep down, I nursed a stubborn hope that someday something would change. That one day my parents would look up from their busy lives and actually see me standing there. My 10th birthday marked the most vivid example of the two worlds I inhabited. My parents had promised to take me to the Science Museum in Minneapolis, something I'd been talking about for months. The morning of my birthday, I woke up early, too excited to sleep. I came downstairs to find my father on his phone, dressed in his suit. "Dad, are you ready for the Science Museum?" I asked, bouncing slightly on my toes. His face registered confusion, then realization, then regret that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, Rachel, I'm so sorry. The Anderson account had an emergency. Your mother and I both have to go in today." "But it's my birthday," I said, my voice small. "We planned this months ago." "We'll make it up to you," Mom said, rushing through the kitchen with her travel mug. "There's cupcakes in the pantry. We'll celebrate this weekend, okay?" They left before I could respond. I sat alone at our granite kitchen island, staring at the box of store-bought cupcakes they'd hastily purchased. I didn't cry. I'd learned by then that tears didn't change anything. Instead, I called Grandma Eleanor. Within an hour, they had arrived at our house car packed with presents and a homemade strawberry cake with 10 perfect candles. "Birthday girl gets to choose everything today," Grandpa Jack announced, sweeping me into a bear hug that smelled of his woodshop and peppermint candy. They didn't take me to the science museum. Instead, they created something better. Grandpa had built a miniature version of the solar system that hung from our backyard tree planets spinning in the summer breeze. Grandma had prepared a treasure hunt through their property with science facts and small gifts hidden at each stop. That night, as we sat on their porch swing, watching fireflies appear in the dusk, Grandma Eleanor stroked my hair. "You know you're the light of our lives, don't you, Rachel?" I nodded, leaning into her soft shoulder, wondering why I couldn't be the light of my parents' lives too. By 13, I had developed a deeper understanding of my family dynamics. While other kids complained about overprotective parents, I'd grown accustomed to the opposite problem. My parents' indifference had become a constant in my life, as reliable as Grandma Eleanor's Sunday pot roast or Grandpa Jack's daily walks around the property at sunrise. The summer before 8th grade, I qualified for a regional math competition in Chicago. Permission slips went home, and I placed mine on the kitchen counter where my parents would see it. 3 days passed. The form remained untouched, though I noticed coffee rings on its edges. "Mom, I need this signed by tomorrow," I finally said, catching her between her arrival home and her retreat to the home office. She glanced at it while checking her watch. "Chicago, who's supervising this trip? Mrs. Landon and Mr. Peters, the math teachers," I explained, hoping she'd show some pride in my achievement. She signed quickly, her signature a hurried scrawl. "Make sure you keep up with your other homework while you're gone. No congratulations, no questions about the competition itself. Just practical considerations and a swift dismissal." That weekend, I told my grandparents about qualifying. Grandpa Jack jumped up from his armchair and performed what he called his victory dance, a silly shuffle that never failed to make me laugh. Grandma Eleanor baked special chocolate chip cookies with little number-shaped sprinkles on top. "Our little mathematician," she beamed. "Jack, we should drive up to Chicago to watch her compete." And they did. They drove 4 hours to sit in a stuffy gymnasium watching me solve equations with other nervous teenagers. When I placed third, Grandpa Jack cheered so loudly the judges looked over with disapproval. I pretended to be embarrassed, but secretly my heart swelled. My parents sent a text when I shared my results. "Good job. Be home by dinner Sunday." At 15, I joined the debate team, finding my voice through structured arguments and evidence-based reasoning. I spent hours at the farmhouse practicing with Grandpa Jack, who played devil's advocate on every topic. "You've got to see all sides, Rachel," he'd say. "That's how you build an argument nobody can knock down." My first major debate tournament coincided with my parents' anniversary weekend. They'd planned a trip to Chicago. "We can't change our reservations," Dad explained when I mentioned the tournament date. "It's not like you need us there anyway. You're always so independent." His words meant as a compliment stung like an accusation. I'd become independent out of necessity, not choice. At 16, after winning a prestigious writing contest, I gathered my courage to confront my parents directly. They sat at our dining table, a rare family dinner prompted by a canceled business dinner on my father's calendar. "Do you even care about anything I do?" I asked, the words erupting after years of quiet acceptance. My parents exchanged glances, appearing genuinely confused. "Of course we care, Rachel," Mom said. "We provide everything you need." "I'm not talking about things," I replied, struggling to articulate the emptiness. "I'm talking about being present, about showing up. We work hard to give you opportunities many kids don't have," Dad said, his tone suggesting I was being ungrateful. "This house, your college fund, the trips we take." "What trips?" I asked bitterly. "You take trips. I stay with Grandma and Grandpa." And they spoil you rotten, Mom said with a dismissive wave. We're trying to raise you to be independent, not needy. There's a difference between independence and abandonment. I said the words hanging in the air between us. Dad's face hardened. That's dramatically unfair, Rachel. We've never abandoned you. We've simply prioritized giving you a secure future over coddling you like your grandparents do. The conversation ended there with nothing resolved, and the distance between us wider than ever. I retreated further into my grandparents' world, spending every possible moment at the farmhouse where I felt seen and valued. As college approached, it was Grandpa Jack who drove me to campus tours and Grandma Eleanor who helped research scholarships. My parents' involvement extended only to spreadsheets comparing tuition costs and eventual salary outcomes for different majors. Then came their surprise announcement during my senior year. They would pay for me to attend an expensive private university known for its business program. This is how we show our love, Rachel, Dad said, sliding the acceptance package across the table. By investing in your future. The word investing said everything. To them, I was another financial decision, an extension of their success metrics, not a person with dreams and needs of my own. My high school graduation day arrived bright and clear. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m, but at noon, my parents informed me they'd need to leave immediately afterward for a work event in Minneapolis. We'll take photos quickly after the ceremony, Mom said, checking her makeup in the hall mirror. The Anderson merger celebration starts at 6. Meanwhile, Grandma and Grandpa had prepared a surprise graduation party at the farmhouse. They'd invited my friends, decorated the barn with twinkling lights, and prepared all my favorite foods. When my parents dropped me off at the farmhouse before heading to Minneapolis, they declined the invitation to stay even for a few minutes. As I watched their car disappear down the driveway, Grandpa Jack put his arm around my shoulders. Their loss, he said, simply leading me toward the celebration where people who truly wanted to share in my joy awaited. College opened a new chapter in my life. I chose Northwestern University in Chicago, close enough to visit my grandparents on occasional weekends, but far enough to establish independence. My parents' financial support came with spreadsheets tracking expected GPAs and internship benchmarks, but little emotional investment in my actual experience. Freshman orientation week found me standing in my dorm room surrounded by boxes and the nervous energy of new beginnings. My roommate Jasmine arrived with her entire family, who spent hours helping arrange her side of the room, offering hugs and tearful goodbyes. My parents had dropped me off with efficient precision, helping unload the car before departing for a business lunch downtown. "Text us when you're settled," Mom had said, checking her watch. That evening, my phone rang with a FaceTime call from the farmhouse. Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa Jack gave me a virtual tour of all the changes they'd made to my room at their house for when I visited. "We put up that bulletin board you wanted," Grandma explained, turning the phone to show a large corkboard above the desk. "For all your college memories and new friends' photos. And I fixed that squeaky floorboard by the closet," Grandpa added proudly. "Though I kind of miss it. It was like the house's way of telling us when you were sneaking in late." We laughed together, and for a moment, the distance between Minnesota and Chicago disappeared. Before ending the call, Grandma held up a package. "This will arrive tomorrow. Just a few homemade cookies to share with your new friends." The care package arrived as promised, along with weekly letters throughout my freshman year. My parents communicated through occasional texts, checking on grades and brief calls that felt like business updates more than conversations. During my sophomore year, I met Aiden in my comparative literature class. Intelligent and thoughtful, he came from a close-knit family that both fascinated and intimidated me. The first time he invited me home for a weekend, I witnessed family dynamics so different from my own that I nearly cried, watching his parents genuinely interested in our class discussions. "Your parents ask so many questions," I commented on the drive back to campus. Aiden glanced over confused. That's what parents do, isn't it? That relationship lasted 8 months before falling apart under the weight of my inability to fully open up. How could I explain that I didn't know how to function in healthy family dynamics, that I was waiting for the inevitable moment when his interest would fade, just as my parents had? After the breakup, I started therapy, using part of my summer job earnings to pay for sessions my parents would have questioned as unnecessary. Dr. Martin helped me identify the impact of emotional neglect. Your grandparents provided crucial attachment and security, she explained. But your parents' indifference created a core belief that you have to earn love through achievement or self-sufficiency. During junior year, troubling news came from home. Grandpa Jack had experienced concerning dizzy spells and was scheduled for tests. I immediately wanted to return home, but my parents discouraged it. Your grandparents would want you focusing on your education, Dad said when I called. There's nothing you can do here anyway. I went anyway, taking a long weekend to help Grandma Eleanor and accompany Grandpa to his doctor's appointment. The diagnosis was concerning, but not immediately dire early signs of heart problems that required medication and lifestyle changes. Don't look so worried, sunshine, Grandpa told me as we sat on the porch swing. I've got plenty of good years left in me. I'm not going anywhere until I see you conquer the world. My parents' reaction to Grandpa's health concerns disturbed me. They seemed almost dismissive of my close relationship with my grandparents. You've always been unnaturally attached to them, Mom commented during a rare Sunday call. It's not healthy to be so involved in elderly relatives' medical issues. They're more than elderly relatives, I snapped back. They're the people who showed up for me my entire life. The silence that followed revealed the chasm between our perspectives. To them, family was a technical designation. To me, family meant the people who made you feel like you belonged. My academic success continued despite these personal challenges. I declared a major in marketing with a minor in creative writing, combining my analytical skills with the storytelling abilities Grandpa Jack had nurtured through years of bedtime stories and afternoon reading sessions on the porch. When I made the dean's list 3 semesters in a row, my parents sent a congratulatory email. My grandparents, despite their limited comfort with technology, arranged a surprise video call with extended family members all holding homemade signs celebrating my achievement. By senior year, I had secured a competitive internship at a Chicago marketing firm, which later extended a job offer for after graduation. When I shared the news with my parents, their response was characteristically practical. Starting salary benefits package, Dad asked. Good location for networking opportunities, Mom noted, though you could have aimed for New York. When I told my grandparents, Grandpa Jack got tears in his eyes. I always knew you were destined for wonderful things, he said, not because of what you achieve, Rachel, but because of who you are. My college graduation ceremony took place on a perfect spring day. I scanned the audience during the procession, quickly finding my grandparents. Grandpa Jack looked frailer than I remembered, leaning slightly on his cane, but his smile was as bright as ever. Beside him, Grandma Eleanor waved enthusiastically, wearing a new dress she'd mentioned buying, especially for this occasion. The journey to Chicago had been difficult for them. Grandpa's health made travel challenging, but they had insisted on being present. My parents sat beside them, checking watches and phones throughout the 3-hour ceremony. At the celebratory dinner afterward, I watched the contrast between my 2 sets of parents. My grandparents asked about my friends, my favorite classes, my hopes for the new job. My parents discussed tax strategies for my new income and the housing market in Chicago. Before returning to Minnesota, Grandpa Jack pressed something into my hand as we hugged goodbye. It was his pocket watch passed down through 3 generations. Time is the most precious thing we have, he whispered. I've always known exactly how I wanted to spend mine loving you. After graduation, I launched into my marketing career at Meridian Creative in downtown Chicago. My small apartment in Wicker Park became my first truly independent space decorated with photos from the farmhouse and a few antique pieces Grandma Eleanor had insisted I take to keep home close. Every Sunday evening, I called my grandparents for long conversations that anchored me amid the whirlwind pace of city life. Those calls became increasingly important when 6 months into my job, Grandma Eleanor shared news that made my heart stop. "The doctor found something during my checkup," she said, her voice deliberately steady. "It's cancer, sweetheart. Stage 2 breast cancer." I took emergency leave the next day, driving straight to Minnesota despite my parents' texts suggesting I wait until the weekend. When I arrived at the farmhouse, Grandma was sitting in her garden, peaceful among her blooming perennials. "Don't look at me like I'm already gone," she scolded gently when she saw my face. "I'm going to fight this thing." And fight she did. The next 6 months brought chemotherapy, radiation, and a strength I could only hope to inherit someday. Grandpa Jack, despite his own health challenges, became her constant caregiver, tracking medications and appointments with military precision. My visits became weekly rather than monthly. I'd leave Chicago Friday night, arriving late at the farmhouse where the porch light always remained on for me. Sundays came too quickly, bringing the return drive to Chicago with a heart increasingly torn between my career and my grandparents. The breaking point came during a video call when I noticed Grandpa Jack's exhaustion. His normally impeccable appearance had given way to unshaven fatigue. Behind him, I could see dishes piled in the sink, so unlike their usual tidy home. "I'm moving back," I announced to my supervisor the next morning. "I need 3 months. I can work remotely for most projects." To my surprise, Meridian agreed to a temporary remote arrangement. My parents, however, were outraged. "This is career suicide," Dad declared during an unexpected visit to my apartment as I packed. "Eleanor has home health aides. Your grandfather is managing. This emotional decision will derail everything you've worked for." "Some things matter more than career trajectories," I replied, continuing to fold clothes into suitcases. "Like what? Watching someone be sick?" Mom asked incredulously. "That's what doctors are for, Rachel." I stopped packing and faced them directly. "Like being present for the people who were present for me. Like showing love through actions, not just financial support." They left angry and bewildered, unable to comprehend my choice. The 3 months stretched to 6 as Grandma Eleanor's condition fluctuated. I worked remotely from the farmhouse dining room, scheduling calls around her treatments. During that time, I witnessed the deep, abiding love between my grandparents that had sustained them through 60 years of marriage. "The secret," Grandma told me one evening as we shelled peas on the porch, "is knowing the difference between loving the idea of someone and loving their actual self-complications and all." Those months held painful moments, holding Grandma's hand through nausea and pain, watching Grandpa struggle with his own health while prioritizing hers. But there were beautiful moments too, stargazing from lawn chairs on clear summer nights, recording Grandma's stories about her childhood, learning family recipes I'd previously taken for granted. My parents visited infrequently, their discomfort with illness evident in their brief, awkward appearances. "Just checking in," they'd say, never staying long enough to be truly helpful. In autumn, we received the devastating news that despite treatment, the cancer had spread. Grandma Eleanor, ever practical, began putting her affairs in order. "No tears yet," she instructed, though her own eyes glistened. "We still have time for joy." And we found it. We celebrated Thanksgiving, early Christmas too. We took drives to see the fall colors Grandma bundled in blankets in the back seat. We looked through old photo albums, filling gaps in stories I'd heard fragments of my entire life. In her final weeks, Grandma Eleanor shared wisdom between increasingly frequent naps. "Love isn't complicated, Rachel," she told me. "It's just showing up day after day and choosing the same people over and over again." She passed peacefully in her sleep on a December night, Grandpa Jack holding one hand and me the other. The farmhouse, always so full of warmth, seemed to exhale a collective breath of sorrow. At the funeral, my parents managed the arrangements with efficient precision, but seemed unable to access genuine grief. Meanwhile, Grandpa Jack moved through the day like a man underwater, accepting condolences with vacant nods, his eyes continually searching for someone who would never again enter the room. 58 years, he whispered to me at the reception. Feels like both forever and not nearly enough. Grandpa's health deteriorated rapidly after Grandma's passing. The doctors called it broken heart syndrome, but that clinical term couldn't capture the profound emptiness that settled over him. Despite my best efforts to engage him in daily activities, he retreated further into memories. One snowy afternoon in January, 3 months after Grandma's passing, Grandpa Jack called me to the porch swing, patting the space beside him. Despite the cold, he insisted on sitting in their favorite spot. "I need to tell you about this place," he said, gesturing to the farmhouse and surrounding property. "Your grandmother and I bought this land when everyone thought we were crazy. Too far from town, they said. Too much work. But we saw something special here." He proceeded to share the history I'd heard pieces of throughout my childhood, how they'd renovated the farmhouse room by room, planted each tree along the driveway, survived blizzards and droughts and financial challenges. "This place isn't just land and timber, Rachel," he said, his breath clouding in the winter air. "It's the physical form of our love story. Every nail, every floorboard has our memories in it." I listened, sensing this wasn't just reminiscence, but something more intentional. "I need you to understand what this place means," he continued, "because places like this are disappearing. People see dollar signs instead of history." Looking back, I realize he was preparing me, though I couldn't see it then. He was fortifying me for battles to come. Grandpa Jack died peacefully in his sleep exactly 1 week after our porch conversation. The doctor said his heart simply stopped, but I knew better. His heart had continued beating these past months, only because he wasn't quite ready to leave me. Once he'd said everything he needed to say, he let go. The funeral was smaller than Grandma Eleanor's held during a February snowstorm that would have made Grandpa shake his head and mutter about inconvenient timing. As we stood at the graveside, the pastor's words nearly lost to the wind, I noticed my parents checking their phones, their impatience barely concealed beneath appropriate funeral expressions. "We should get back to the house before the roads worsen," Dad commented as the final prayers concluded. Back at the farmhouse, neighbors and friends brought casseroles and shared stories about Grandpa Jack's generosity and humor. My parents moved through the gathering like efficient hosts, rather than grieving family members checking watches and subtly directing the flow of guests toward the door as the afternoon progressed. By evening, when the last cars had disappeared down the snow-covered driveway, an uncomfortable silence settled over the farmhouse. For the first time in my memory, my parents seemed genuinely unsure what to do next. "We should discuss next steps," Dad finally said, setting his coffee mug on the kitchen counter. "There's the matter of the house and property." "Thomas," Mom interjected, shooting him a warning glance. "Not today." "It's a practical consideration," he replied. "Rachel needs to get back to Chicago soon. We should address the logistics." I was too emotionally exhausted to argue. "Can we talk about this tomorrow? I'd like to just be here tonight." They agreed, reluctantly retreating to the guest room, while I curled up in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the books Grandpa had read to me and the quilt Grandma had made for my 16th birthday. Sleep came fitfully interrupted by grief that arrived in waves. The next morning, I began the painful process of sorting through my grandparents' belongings. Each item held memories: Grandpa's collection of wooden puzzles, Grandma's recipe cards written in her elegant script, the matching rocking chairs on the porch where they'd spent countless evenings watching the sunset. My parents appeared mid-morning, dressed in clothes more suitable for a business meeting than clearing out a loved one's home. Dad carried his laptop, setting it on the dining room table with purpose. "We need to discuss the will," he announced without preamble. The meeting with Mr. Harrington, my grandparents' longtime attorney, took place the following day in his wood-paneled office downtown. As he adjusted his reading glasses and opened the formal document, I braced myself for details of final arrangements I'd have to manage. To our beloved granddaughter, Rachel Collins. Mr. Harrington read, "We leave our home farm and all associated property, including all contents and furnishings." My parents' sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. "There must be some mistake," Dad interrupted. "The farm property has been in the family for generations." Mr. Harrington peered over his glasses. "There's no mistake, Thomas. Jack and Eleanor were very clear about their wishes. The property passes to Rachel. There are some minor financial bequests to local charities, but the bulk of the estate goes to her." The drive back to the farmhouse passed in tense silence. Once inside, my father's composure broke. "This is absurd," he declared. "They've put you in an impossible position." "What are you going to do with a farmhouse in rural Minnesota when you live in Chicago? This property requires maintenance taxes upkeep." "I haven't even had time to think about it." I admitted, the inheritance still sinking in. "I just lost them both. The property is the least of my concerns right now." "Well, it should be your concern," Mom interjected. "We need to be practical. The sensible solution is to sell." "Sell?" The word felt like a betrayal, even as it left my lips. "I couldn't sell their home." "It's your home now," Dad corrected. "And it's a significant asset that's sitting empty. Do you plan to abandon your career and move back to play farmer?" His dismissive tone awakened something protective in me. "I'm not making any decisions right now. I need time." Over the next week, my parents' attitude shifted subtly. Instead of pushing for an immediate sale, they began suggesting family discussions about the property's future. Dad mentioned casually that he'd run some numbers on property values in the area. "Just to give you options," he explained over dinner. "You should know what you're sitting on." Then came the revelation that changed everything. "There's been interest in the property," Dad mentioned casually 3 days later. "From Northland developers." "What do you mean, interest?" I asked. "How would they even know it's available? Grandpa just died." Mom and Dad exchanged glances. "Well, they've been eyeing this area for a while. They're building a planned community. The Collins property would complete their land parcel." The way he said Collins property instead of the farmhouse struck me as odd. And how did he know so much about these developers? That evening, while searching Grandpa's desk for insurance papers, I found a business card for Ryan Westfield, Development Director at Northland. On the back, in my father's handwriting, was a note: "Discuss after closing of estate. Preliminary offer 1.2 M." My hands trembled as I stared at the card. This wasn't recent interest. This had been planned. The next morning, I drove into town and met with Sandy Thompson, who had worked at the local real estate office for 30 years and knew everyone's business. "Oh, Northland's been sniffing around your grandparents' property for at least a year," she confirmed when I inquired casually. "Your dad's been in talks with them. I assumed it was on your grandparents' behalf, but Jack always told me he'd never sell to developers." The betrayal cut deep. My parents hadn't just been thinking practically since Grandpa's death. They'd been planning this, waiting for my grandparents to die so they could push me to sell the property they coveted. Back at the farmhouse, I searched more thoroughly. In Grandpa's filing cabinet, I found copies of emails between my father and Northland developers, dating back 18 months, discussing potential terms once the property becomes available. My parents had been plotting to sell my grandparents' beloved home while Grandma was still fighting cancer. I sat in Grandpa Jack's study, surrounded by evidence of my parents' betrayal. The emails laid out a methodical plan. My father had been positioning himself as the future decision-maker for the property, assuring Northland developers they could move forward once the current owners were no longer in the picture. My hands shook as I gathered the papers, anger building with each damning page. The farmhouse that had been my sanctuary, that my grandparents had lovingly tended for decades, had been reduced to a land parcel and dollar figure in my parents' minds. When their car pulled into the driveway that afternoon, I was waiting in the living room. The evidence spread across the coffee table. Their expressions shifted from surprise to defensiveness as they realized what I'd discovered. "You were planning to sell Grandpa and Grandma's home before they even died," I said, my voice unnaturally calm. "You were just waiting for them to be gone?" Dad straightened his shoulders. "You're overreacting. We were simply exploring options." "Behind their backs." I stood up, rage finally breaking through. "While Grandma was fighting cancer, you were negotiating with developers to bulldoze their home." "Be reasonable, Rachel," Mom said, using her surgeon's authoritative tone. "Your grandparents were sentimentalists. They made an emotional decision leaving this property to you instead of considering its real value." "Its real value?" I repeated incredulously. "This home is worth more than whatever number Northland put on paper." $1.5 million, Dad stated flatly. "That's their current offer. $1.5 million, Rachel. Think of what you could do with that instead of clinging to an outdated property that's falling apart." "Falling apart?" I gestured around the meticulously maintained home. "Grandpa fixed everything himself right up until the end." "You're not seeing this clearly," Mom interjected. "This is a business decision. The land is valuable for development. Your attachment is clouding your judgment." "My attachment?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean my love for the only people who actually showed up for me my entire life?" A tense silence followed before Dad spoke again, his voice deliberately measured. "We've always had your best interests at heart, Rachel. Everything we've done has been to secure your future." "No," I countered. "Everything you've done has been about money and appearances. You've never understood what actually matters." "What matters is financial security," Dad insisted. "Your grandparents filled your head with impractical ideals about family and tradition. The real world runs on more tangible currencies." "Did you ever even care about them?" I asked. "They were your parents, Dad. Did you ever love them at all?" His expression hardened. "They were obstacles. They undermined our parenting at every turn, making us look negligent by comparison with their excessive coddling." The brutal honesty stunned me into silence. "They never approved of our life choices," Mom added. "They thought careers and ambition were secondary to baking cookies and attending school plays. They never understood we were building something greater." "Something greater than being present for your child?" I asked quietly. "You were always an extension of us." Dad admitted the truth finally emerging. "Our achievement, our legacy, not an independent entity requiring constant validation." The words hit like physical blows. I'd suspected their emotional distance my entire life, but hearing it articulated so coldly made something break inside me. "Get out," I whispered. "Don't be dramatic." Mom sighed. "We need to discuss the Northland offer. They're expecting an answer by Friday." "Get out!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the farmhouse in a way that would have normally embarrassed me. "This is my home now, and I want you to leave." "You're being irrational," Dad said dismissively. "The developers have plans drawn up already. They're prepared to break ground next month. This is happening, Rachel." "Not without my signature, it isn't," I replied, a sudden clarity emerging through my rage. "And I will never sign." Dad's expression darkened. "Then we have a problem, because we've already given Northland our word. Contracts are being prepared." "You had no right," I said, my voice breaking. "This was never yours to sell." "Listen carefully." Dad's voice dropped to a threatening tone I'd never heard before. This development is happening. Either you cooperate and walk away with a substantial sum, or we'll contest the will. We'll claim Jack wasn't competent when he signed it." "You wouldn't," I gasped. "We would," Mom confirmed coldly. "Your grandfather's declining health is well documented. We can make a case that he was manipulated into changing his will." "By who? By me? I didn't even know they were leaving me the property." "Perception is reality in legal matters," Dad stated. "The choice is yours. Sell willingly and benefit financially, or fight us in court and lose everything in legal fees." In that moment, looking at the calculating strangers who happened to be my parents, a lifetime of seeking their approval crumbled. The revelation was both devastating and liberating. I'd spent years believing if I achieved enough, succeeded enough, they might finally love me properly. Now I understood that had never been possible. "Get out," I repeated, my voice steady, despite tears streaming down my face. "My lawyers will contact you." "Don't be foolish," Mom warned. "You're throwing away your inheritance and our relationship." "What relationship?" I asked simply. "When have we ever truly had one?" After they left, I collapsed on the porch swing, the same spot where Grandpa had told me about the property's significance just weeks earlier. The weight of betrayal pressed on my chest until breathing seemed impossible. For hours, I sat paralyzed by grief and uncertainty. Around dusk, a truck pulled into the driveway. It was Howard Jennings, our nearest neighbor and Grandpa Jack's oldest friend. "Thought I'd check on you," he said, climbing the porch steps with a casserole dish. "Saw your parents drive away looking mighty unhappy." Without intending to, I found myself telling Howard everything. The inheritance, the developers, my parents' ultimatum. Howard listened quietly, his weathered face growing increasingly concerned. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Jack warned me this might happen," he said. "That's why he came to see me last month, made me promise to tell you something if things went sideways." "Tell me what?" "That you're not alone in this fight. This community valued your grandparents. We won't let their legacy be bulldozed for vacation homes." That conversation sparked what would become my support network. Howard introduced me to his daughter Lisa, an environmental lawyer who specialized in land preservation. Through her, I met others who had fought similar battles against developers. Meanwhile, my parents escalated their threats, filing a preliminary motion to contest the will. The community responded with unexpected force. Jack and Eleanor Collins had touched many lives during their decades in town. People came forward with stories how Grandpa had helped rebuild after the Hamilton fire, how Grandma had organized meal trains for new mothers and the elderly. Town meetings became battlegrounds as Northland presented their plans for luxury housing while locals argued for preserving farmland. When news spread that the development would redirect water flow and potentially cause flooding to adjacent properties, additional allies emerged. In my darkest moments, questioning whether fighting was worth the emotional and financial cost, I would walk the property at sunrise, as Grandpa had done daily. Among the apple trees he'd planted, watching deer graze in the meadow where I'd once helped Grandma gather wildflowers, the answer always came clear. Some things were worth fighting for, even at great cost. The 6 months following my confrontation with my parents transformed me more profoundly than all my years of education. The legal battle they initiated forced me to learn about property rights, environmental regulations, and historical preservation. Their attempt to paint Grandpa as mentally incompetent backfired spectacularly when his doctor and attorney provided extensive evidence of his sharp mind until the very end. Through it all, the farmhouse became more than just a property I'd inherited. It became a symbol of resistance against the disposable culture my parents represented, where everything and everyone had a price tag. My position at Meridian hung in the balance as the temporary remote arrangement stretched on. Eventually, I made the difficult decision to resign, turning instead to freelance marketing work I could manage from Minnesota. The career trajectory my parents had mapped out fractured, but in its place grew something more authentic to my values. The turning point in the legal battle came unexpectedly. Lisa Jennings discovered that part of the farmland qualified for a historical agricultural designation due to Grandpa's heirloom apple orchard. This finding, combined with a wetland assessment that identified protected species on the property, created significant obstacles to Northland's development plans. Facing mounting community opposition and regulatory hurdles, Northland eventually withdrew their offer. My parents' legal challenge lost momentum without the developer's resources backing it. After a particularly damning deposition, where my father admitted to negotiating with developers before Grandpa's death, their attorney advised settling. The terms were simple. They would drop all claims to the property in exchange for a small financial settlement from the estate. The relationship, however, was beyond repair. At the final meeting with our respective attorneys, my father couldn't resist one parting shot. "You've wasted a fortune defending a decaying house and worthless sentimentality," he said as we gathered our papers. I met his gaze steadily. "I've preserved something priceless. You never understood the difference." We haven't spoken since that day. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for the phone, conditioned by a lifetime of seeking their approval. Then I remember Grandma Eleanor's words, "Love isn't complicated. It's just showing up day after day and choosing the same people over and over again." My parents had never chosen me, not really, and now I was finally free to stop choosing them. The farmhouse required work, both physical repairs and emotional healing. I began slowly, starting with Grandma's garden that had become overgrown during the months of legal battles. Howard Jennings helped fix the roof before winter. Lisa connected me with a historic preservation consultant who helped identify grants for maintaining the property's agricultural heritage. Gradually, the farmhouse transformed from a place of grief to a place of possibility. I converted the barn into a community space for local meetings and classes. The apple orchard became part of a regional heritage fruit program, with local schools bringing students to learn about sustainable farming. My marketing skills found new purpose as I helped small businesses in town develop online presences. Some days I worked from Grandpa's study, other days from local cafes. The flexible schedule allowed me to volunteer with a youth mentoring program working with children from homes similar to mine, where achievement was valued over emotional connection. Not all days were triumphs. I still had moments of doubt, particularly when passing certain milestones alone. Career achievements felt hollow without Grandpa's proud smile. Holidays echoed with the absence of Grandma's cooking and stories. Some nights the farmhouse felt too large, too quiet without them. Therapy continued now, focused on building a chosen family rather than mourning the biological one that had failed me. I learned to recognize the relationships that nourished rather than depleted me. I practiced setting boundaries and expressing needs directly instead of through achievement. In spring, a year after Grandpa's passing, I planted a memorial garden between their two burial plots in the small cemetery behind the town church. Roses for Grandma, whose name Eleanor meant light. Oak saplings for Grandpa Jack, strong and unwavering. As I worked the soil, mixing in compost from their own garden, I felt their presence not as a haunting, but as a continuation. "The greatest gift they gave me wasn't this property," I told Lisa Jennings as we sat on the porch swing one evening. "It was showing me what love actually looks like in action. Not perfect, not without struggle, but consistent and unconditional." The healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks, like finding old family photos that triggered grief anew, or receiving a clinical holiday card from my parents addressed to current resident at the farmhouse address. But each challenge strengthened my conviction that I had made the right choice in honoring my grandparents' legacy. 2 years after inheriting the farmhouse, I hosted the first annual Collins Farm Community Day, inviting neighbors and townspeople to enjoy the property my grandparents had so lovingly maintained. Children played in the same meadows where I had chased fireflies. Families picnicked under trees Grandpa had planted decades ago. The event concluded with a lantern release at sunset honoring loved ones lost. As I watched the lanterns rise into the darkening sky, I realized something profound indifference had shaped me as surely as love had. My parents' neglect had carved empty spaces, but my grandparents had filled those spaces with something more valuable than approval or achievement. They had given me the capacity to recognize real love when I encountered it and the courage to create it for others. That night, standing on the porch, as the last guests departed, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since their deaths. The farmhouse wasn't just a memorial to the past. It was becoming something new, something that honored their values while creating space for future generations to experience the belonging I had found here. True worth, I've learned, isn't measured in property values or career achievements. It's found in the consistent choice to show up, to remain present, to create spaces where people feel seen and valued for exactly who they are. My grandparents understood this intrinsically. My parents never will. I'm still learning to trust that I am worthy of love simply for existing, not for what I achieve or provide. Some days that lesson comes easier than others. But each morning, as the sun rises over the fields my grandparents tended, I remind myself of Grandpa's words during our last conversation. This place isn't just land and timber, Rachel. It's the physical form of our love story. Now I'm writing the next chapter of that story, not alone, but surrounded by the community that has become my chosen family. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should have seen you, most clearly know this family can be found in unexpected places. Sometimes, the most profound love comes from people with no biological obligation to care. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is protecting what matters even when everyone tells you to let it go. What part of my journey resonates with you? Have you ever had to fight for something meaningful when others couldn't understand its value? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please subscribe and hit the like button. Your support helps more stories like this reach others who might need to hear they're not alone in their experience. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't determined by those who failed to see it.